Our next speaker is here. Let's get him up and going. So it's my pleasure to welcome Andrew Aragon with us today. Andrew is with a company called Quorum, and he's going to talk to us about engaging in grassroots efforts in a digital world. You know, one of the things that we're really advocating here at NIADA is for you to have opportunities to engage with your members of Congress at your dealerships. We've had several of you over the course of the last year, 18 months or so, that have had members of Congress come, check out what's going on at your dealership, talk to them about policies and such that are impacting you directly while on your turf, not necessarily on their turf here. That's a great, effective way to engage them. But there's also social media tools that are available for you to engage in that. And Andrew is here to help us learn about that. Andrew is also from New Mexico. So our New Mexico folks, make sure you go and say hi to him. He's got his pin. He is displaying the flag proudly. So Andrew, come on up.
So 2 Andrews in a row. I can say that Andrew is going to be a pretty tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. Thank you for the introduction, Sean. I want to say thank you to Steve Jordan as well for the 2 of you asking me to speak today, and to all of you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you all today. Mr. Ullman said that when he does speak to millennials about technology, it keeps him on his toes. So with that said, I'm a millennial, and I'm here to talk to you about technology today. But specifically about what it means to be a grassroots advocate in a rapidly changing digital landscape. I like to think of myself as a young man, but even in my lifetime, the way that people communicate with their elected officials has shifted dramatically. Even when I was born, the only way to really contact your federal officials was to call, or you could fax, you could send a letter, or you could see them in the district. And over the course of the last 25 years, that has shifted dramatically. You now have outlets to speak to your federal, state, and local officials in an instant. And I can say just a little bit about me. I've been in policy and advocacy since I first got my start. I got my first advocacy job in college. I was lobbying for the student government, trying to change. We have a lottery scholarship. We got it through the New Mexico House, and it died in the New Mexico Senate, so we failed miserably, but you win some, you lose some. After college, I worked in Congress for 3 years. I was working as an intern in Congressman Steve Pierce's office of New Mexico. I was only supposed to be in Washington for 3 months for a college semester. And last year I just hit 6 years, so I've been here for quite some time. But then after Congress, I decided to go into the private sector, and I found this incredible company that was building technology for grassroots advocacy and government relations. It's an industry that's been around as long as elected officials have been around, and they found a market, and they found a place where we could actually come in and bring some changes to that digital landscape, because it was also changing pretty rapidly. So that's a little bit about me. When Sean asked me to speak, I was excited for multiple reasons. I love getting the opportunity to share my experiences with folks, but it also gives me the opportunity to talk about the men in this picture. So you can ignore me, I was in an awkward college phase, but the man on the far right is my grandpa, Grandpa Gerald. And for mine and my siblings' entire lives, these 2 men worked at Tillery Buick GMC in Los Lunas, New Mexico. And it put food on our tables. It put me and all my siblings through school. So the members of my family are stakeholders in the success of not only your association, but your industry at large. So I'm incredibly grateful for all the work that you're doing every day. I'm very grateful for the impact that you all have in your communities. And again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit today. So, by a show of hands, who here has a Facebook? I'd imagine most of you. Okay, how about Twitter? Good. We know the president certainly does. How about Instagram? Okay. Now, I know a lot of us use YouTube and watch YouTube. Does anyone have a YouTube channel? I love to see this. Okay, good, good. How about Medium? This is usually hit or miss, usually miss. It's okay, I'm a millennial, I don't have a Medium account either, so don't worry about it. But the reason I ask is because more and more over the course of the last 10 years, and certainly in the last 5, there have been increasing trends in elected officials to use all of those channels. So for those of you that do have Twitter and Facebook, have you ever tweeted at or tagged an elected official in your posts? Good. There could be more of you, and that's my point. So I mentioned that the company I work for now, we've spent the last 5 years gathering as much data on Congress and state officials and local officials, officials in the EU, as we possibly can. And we've built what is essentially a Google for members of Congress. So each year we put out a social media report to essentially determine who is on social media, why are they on social media, what are they saying, and we found that there will always be the traditional means of communication. The floor statements, the press releases, the newsletters to constituents, those are never going to go away. Those are tried and true. But as elected officials are trying more and more to have a direct line of communication with their constituents, they're leaning into social media to do so. So I want to share some of the information that we pulled for our 2018 Congress on Social Media report. We found that 95% of the Senate is on Facebook. It's close, not all. We also found that 97% of the House is on Facebook. Now, Twitter's a little bit different. It goes without saying that in a world where a tweet can shift global markets, there's no reason why one of your tweets can't change an elected official's mind or have an impact on the way that they vote or the meetings that they take. So with Twitter having an increasing presence in the policy landscape, we found that the Senate, all of it, is on Twitter. And for the most part, they're tweeting at least 2 or 3 times a day. Now, the House hasn't quite gotten there, but they're really close. Keep in mind, this is 2018 data, so this could have changed since then, and it's my hope that it has. Instagram. Most people don't associate Instagram with policy. I upload pictures of my breakfast, or a brunch that I went to, or my friend's dog. But the elected officials are increasingly using Instagram as a means to communicate directly with their constituents. When I was working for Congressman Pierce, I would staff him during his financial services committees, and we would disagree about whether or not we should post this on Instagram. I thought we were going to bore everyone back home, but he was insistent, and he was the boss, and he won election, and I didn't, so I posted on Instagram. So with 70% of the Senate on Instagram, 50% of the House on Instagram, it's becoming an increasingly efficient means to communicate directly with your officials. You can respond, you can reply to their posts, you can tag them, you can send them stories, and you can take their stories and post them to yours. It's an increasingly transparent platform that more and more people are using to communicate with their elected officials. Now, YouTube. This is an interesting one. So 93% of the Senate is on YouTube. Each committee in the Senate and in the House have official YouTube channels. You can subscribe to them, you can follow them. Google does an excellent job, because they bought YouTube, at transcribing every single congressional hearing. If it's on TV, it's probably on YouTube, or if not, C-SPAN, and it's really easy to just go through the transcripts if it's something important to you and see what was said and when it was said. And that's the House, again, this is a recurring pattern. The House has yet to catch up. They're at 84% on YouTube. Now, I mentioned Medium earlier. Medium is essentially a blog, and we found that more and more congressional candidates are writing on Medium as a means to explore what platforms they might adopt when and if they become members of Congress. So we dug even deeper, and we wanted to learn who is most active on social media. You'll see that Senator Rubio comes in very first with 3,864 tweets. He is cranking them out consistently, and a lot of this is his communications team. Granted, a senator can't spend all his time on social media, but he has the most active presence. So it's really easy to assume that if his team is on Twitter and they're cranking out this content, that also means that they're monitoring the responses and the replies that are coming back. Now, it's a pretty even balance between Republicans and Democrats on Twitter. Facebook is a little bit different story. For whatever reason, and we don't try to get into the causal reasons behind this, but for whatever reason, Democrats tend to be more vocal on Facebook. So it's easier to assume there that because their team is on this platform, there's no reason you shouldn't be too. Now, in the House, you'll see that on Twitter, it's mostly Democrats, so it's a little bit of a flip. And again, we don't get into the causes, we just observe and record. So again, if them and their staff are on these platforms, you should be too. Now on Facebook, it's a mix, but the point being, these are incredibly efficient means by which members of Congress and state officials and local officials are showing transparency and accountability. Because also in my time in Congressman Pierce's office, I went from intern to staff assistant to legislative correspondent. I was a legislative correspondent for a year, and it was my job to ensure that every piece of correspondence that came into the office, whether from a constituent or an agency, regardless of what it was, each piece of correspondence needed to have a response. And more offices will task their legislative correspondents with responding to tweets. Now, members of Congress's MRAs can only be dedicated to responding to constituents. They can't respond to folks that are not constituents, but it doesn't mean that they're not paying attention. If, for whatever reason, a vote is coming up in committee and it's on a bill or an amendment that can impact your industry, whether you're a constituent or not, you can blow up someone's Twitter feed. And I've seen multiple instances where this is done really well. We worked with NAMI. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and there was a vote coming up on the ACA. Now, regardless of your stance, there was a rapid response needed. There was a vote coming up in the Senate, and NAMI sent out a call to action to each of their state alliances, and over the course of 48 hours, 200,000 pieces of unique correspondence was sent to members of the Senate. Now, 200,000 pieces of correspondence to the Senate, to the Hill, is something that you can't ignore. It's a groundswell. There are clearly people in the district who have a stake in this vote, who care, and who want it to see, and who want to see it go a certain way. And it worked. It worked really well for them because their grassroots advocates were engaged, they had their Twitter handles ready, and even on their phone were tweeting out either their representatives or members of the committee and letting them know that there is someone back home who cares. So, more and more elected officials are on social media. I've touched on why that's important, but I can't stress enough. These are platforms that these elected officials pay attention to. I would have to draft Facebook posts and Twitter direct messages. We would respond to Instagram captions. It's an effective means to have your voice heard, especially in the offices that have a more increased focus on digital means. So the best ways to participate is to just participate. Meet legislators where they are. You can always send an email. Each senator, each representative has a contact me page where they'll verify that you are a constituent. And once you've done it once, you can go back consistently. For the most part, you might get canned responses, In some cases, you're going to get unique responses, either from the congressman or the senator directly, or from their staff. That's one way. It's an effective way. It's easy. You just go to their site and their contact me page, and you'll get an email response. But it'll save you more time to just either activate a Twitter account if you don't already have one, or pull up Twitter, tag them, and send it off. Now, in some instances, they will take the time to verify that you are a constituent. If they're receiving 200,000 Twitter mentions, they're probably going to have to draft a statement if they didn't already have one. It pushes the needle significantly. And I lovingly call Washington, D.C. the place where good ideas come to die. But if your view of success is getting a bill signed into law by the president, it's probably not going to happen. With Congress becoming increasingly divided, less and less legislation makes it through. There are still appropriations bills that can be very, very important, but this isn't something that applies just to federal officials. This is just data that we pulled on federal officials, but we've found over the course of time, both state and local officials are increasingly leaning into these platforms. So it's a good practice, it's usually easy, and if you can tell a compelling story in 140 characters or less, it's gonna be heard. The president can certainly do it. There's no reason why you can't too. So there are also very effective means to do this. One best practice, don't curse at your senators or your elected officials. They don't like it and they're probably not gonna respond. I understand you might be angry. A natural response might just be to curse at them. Don't do that. I think one of the most effective, and I mentioned NAMI earlier, but it's a pretty simple technique, and we call it a thank or spank. It's a little odd, but if an elected official puts out a statement or introduces a bill or votes on an amendment in committee that is favorable to your community or your industry, thank them. They'll appreciate it. And if they don't do that, if they've put out a statement that negatively impacts your bottom line, they should know. So spank them. Tell them why this is impactful. Tell them that you are a real person who this will have a real effect on. Because Andrew Ullman said it very well, but you are the economic drivers of the country. You have not only a real story with real solutions, but you can also have real problems with real solutions. And there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to offer that solution to your members of Congress, to your state officials, to your local officials, by the means that they will receive it fastest, especially on Twitter. I'm leaning into Twitter a lot. Facebook is equally effective in this. So I got to sit down with Jordan Craig at the American Farm Bureau. And I asked him what his grassroots strategy is, because they've built out a really, really powerful grassroots advocacy supplement to their lobbying and legislative work. And he told me that the secret to success is pretty simple, is to just tell your story. They're just like you, small business owners. There are farmers across the country. Who doesn't love small business owners and farmers, right? But if you can tell your story well, it's going to be heard. You are the only person that can tell your story. So when there are real impacts on the line that are impacted by a single vote or a piece of legislation, share that. If you can do it in a tweet, that's incredible. If not, maybe shift over to Facebook and tag your elected officials. Again, it's a direct means of communication. It takes less time than it would to send an email, to go to the contact page, fill out the information, but it's equally impactful. But Jordan Craig's secret to success was that he watched every Disney Pixar movie he could find. Toy Story, A Bug's Life, all of the Pixar movies. I had no idea where he was going with this. But he told me that he took the impacts of a Disney story, where there's a beginning, there's a middle, a shift, and an end, and took that message to the farmers, to his members. to his advocates and told them, if you can tell your story with a beginning, a middle, a shift where this policy will actually affect you, and an end, a thank or a spank, it's going to have real impact, it's going to be very powerful, and it's going to land directly on the desk of your elected official. Again, federal, state, and local. More and more, they're using these platforms as a means to communicate directly. So I do want to save some time so that I can answer questions, but I do also want to leave you with this, because I think Steve Jordan said it best. No one can tell your story better than you, and your story as a small business owner, NIADA member, an independent dealer is an important one to tell. I certainly agree with that. I think my grandpa and my dad would agree with that. You have an important story to tell. So I would say, tell your story, engage directly on social media, change minds, and change policy. That's all I have.
Does anybody have a question if you want to ask?
Absolutely.
Dan, we got a microphone coming, or if you can stand up and scream.
Yeah, I can just talk loud. What percentage of staffers versus politicians are responding on social media?
So it's going to vary. I will say that, at least in my experience, staff on the Hill are very young, for the most part. They all have their own social media accounts. Now, in some cases, in my experience as an LC, if you're getting, there is software to kind of categorize the correspondence that's coming in. There's not one for social media. So the responses that you're getting in social media are a lot more authentic. Even if they are coming from staff, ultimately, at the end of the day, nothing gets out of that office without the congressman's approval. And that's in both the Senate and the House. Even if it's signed by an auto pen, it still has to go through the congressman. It's just going to vary, but when we would collect information on correspondence, we would break it into sentiments. We would draft responses that would be sent out to all of those constituents. But before we did, we would have to get it approved by the congressman. So it's going to vary office to office. Each office has their own policy. And each office also has staff dedicated to certain legislative issues. So sometimes it's coming from the staff, sometimes it's coming from the member directly.
Thank you. Last question while they take the microphone to the next guy. Where would Trump stack up on the versus Rubio up there on Twitter? Do you know?
Way more. Way, 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 way more. Probably the most top 5, maybe top 3 most vocal officials on Twitter. I had to turn off my notifications on Trump tweets because it was too much.
What are the average size staffs for Senate and House? I'm thinking, how can these small little House groups keep up with all of this? How many people do the senators have? How many people do the House members have?
So in the House, it's usually around the same. There's around 7 to 9 staffers in the district office, and then probably another 7 to 10. 7 to 9 in the DC office, and then 7 to 12 in the district offices, just depending on how large the district is. But to answer your question, they keep up with it because it's their job. They are very much public servants. It's my opinion that they're underpaid and overworked, but they are dedicated. And there are also systems in place to help organize this huge influx of information as it comes through. The emails is probably one that's been around for at least 10 years. But the social media, it takes not only a communications team, but also a legislative staff to ensure that they're keeping track of all this information coming in. There's no real good way to do it, which is actually great as grassroots advocates because the responses that you do get on social media don't go through these organizational systems of putting out responses. Did that answer your question?
Another question here.
Yeah, I just got, you always hear don't ever read the comments. You can tweet, but don't ever read the comments because there's a lot of hate speech and stuff on there. I know with my business, we have a very active Facebook page, and we hit back in the comments, and it puts more importance on our page, I think. Lets people know that we are active. We're going to read your comment, and we're going to respond to it. Do you see elected officials like going back and not like hitting back, but at least responding to some of that hate speech or some of that stuff in the comments?
So
does that work?
There, to the extent of my knowledge, most, if not all, members that have an official Facebook page have rules in place, and if you violate those rules, you're usually banned, but that's usually done by staff. We monitored our Facebook page very closely, would get alerts anytime anything changed, someone liked a status, someone posted something new. It was very open, but we did have rules in place, so if there was any profanity, if there were death threats, we had to report those immediately. So there are rules in place to monitor, but for the most part, it's going to vary office by office in what they let fly. I would encourage you to keep up having people on your Facebook page be vocal. Because of Facebook's algorithm, that page is going to be seen by more and more people who are not in that group, and it's going to bring it to the top of the legislators' feed as well. An active Facebook group is incredible. Some of Facebook's algorithms are hit or miss, but for a page that does have active participants in the comments feeds, that's going to be seen a lot more quickly and by more people. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
Let's give Andrew a round of applause. Thanks for coming, buddy.